She looked me right in the eye and told me my grandson's wheelchair would ruin her wedding photos. Not that he'd be in the way. Not that the venue had limited space. Not that it was complicated or logistically difficult. She said it would ruin the aesthetic. I want you to understand what kind of man I am before I tell you what I did next. I am not a man who raises his voice. I am not a man who threatens people. I spent 41 years in commercial real estate buying land, developing properties, negotiating leases, and the most important thing I learned in 4 decades of business is this: you never show your hand before you're ready to play it. So when my son's fiancée sat across from me at that kitchen table and explained, in the calmest, most reasonable voice she could manage, that my 8-year-old grandson Marcus couldn't attend their wedding because his wheelchair wouldn't photograph well, I didn't say a word. I nodded. I picked up my coffee cup. I took a sip, and I waited. Because I already knew something she didn't. I already knew something that was going to change everything. But that's the part of the story I'll get to in a little while, because first, you need to understand how we got to that kitchen table. You need to understand Marcus. And you need to understand exactly what kind of woman Desiree had already shown herself to be long before that morning. My son Daniel is 41 years old. He's a good man. A quiet man. He coaches Little League in the spring. He calls me every Sunday morning without fail. And he has never in his life been comfortable with conflict. I don't say that as a criticism. Some people move through the world without sharp edges. And Daniel is one of them. He was raised by a woman, my late wife Carol, who believed that most arguments could be settled with a good meal and a firm but gentle conversation. He got that from her. I always admired it, even when it drove me crazy. He met Desiree 3 years ago at a conference in Atlanta. She's a marketing director. Smart, polished, ambitious, the kind of person who enters a room and immediately begins calculating who in it is useful to her. I don't say that to be unfair. I say it because it's what I observed. Over and over. Across 30-some-odd dinners and holiday gatherings and Sunday afternoon visits, she assessed people for their value. She organized them. And she was very, very good at it. Marcus is my daughter Patricia's son. Patricia was my youngest child, and she died 4 years ago. Aneurism. She was 36 years old. She was running on a Tuesday morning, and she was gone before the ambulance reached her. There is no way to explain what it is to lose a child. I won't try. I'll just tell you that Patricia was the kind of person who made every room she walked into feel like the sun had come out from behind a cloud. And that Marcus has her eyes, her laugh, and her absolutely infuriating habit of humming to himself when he's thinking. Marcus has cerebral palsy. He's been in a wheelchair since he was 3. He is 8 years old now. He reads at a 6th grade level. He has opinions about baseball statistics that embarrass grown men at dinner tables. And he is, without question, the most important person in my life. After Patricia died, I became his primary guardian. His father, a man who was never particularly invested in fatherhood, even when Patricia was alive, was gone within 6 months. No legal fight. He just left. And so it was me and Marcus, figuring it out together. In a house full of Carol's photographs and Patricia's old books, and a small collection of vintage baseball cards that Marcus and I had been building together for 2 years. He calls me Grandpa Reg. That's all you need to know. The first time I noticed something was wrong with how Desiree felt about Marcus. We were at a birthday dinner for Daniel. It was a restaurant in the city, a nice place. The kind with white tablecloths and soft lighting. There were 8 of us around the table, me, Marcus, Danielle, Desiree, 2 of Daniel's friends, and Desiree's sister and brother-in-law. We were seated at a round table near the window. Marcus's wheelchair fit just fine. He was doing what Marcus always does at restaurants, reading the menu with extreme seriousness, as if he were studying for an exam. He decided to order the salmon. He told me the description used the word seared, and he had never had seared salmon before, and he thought this seemed like an appropriate occasion. Desiree watched this exchange with an expression I can only describe as mild impatience. Not cruelty, not open disdain, just impatience. Like Marcus was a complication in an otherwise manageable evening. At one point, her brother-in-law leaned over to Marcus and asked about his wheelchair in that way adults sometimes do, with exaggerated friendliness that lands awkward. Marcus, being Marcus, launched into a detailed explanation of the difference between his manual chair and the power chair he uses at school. He had opinions. He had statistics. He'd apparently been researching newer models online and had a whole analysis prepared about turning radius. I watched Desiree's face during this. She was smiling with her mouth. Her eyes were somewhere else entirely. I filed it away. There were other moments. Small ones. Desiree forgetting to include Marcus in group photos at family gatherings, always with a quick apology. Always blamed on the chaos of the moment. Desiree steering conversations away from anything Marcus was engaged in, changing the subject with a kind of smooth, practiced ease that you'd only notice if you were paying attention. Desiree referring to Marcus as your situation once, in a conversation with Daniel that she didn't know I'd partially overheard from the hallway of their apartment. Your situation. I am 70 years old. I spent 4 decades in business with some very difficult people. I know how to watch. I know how to wait. And I know that the moments that reveal a person's true character are not the loud ones, they're the quiet ones. When someone thinks no one important is paying attention, I was always paying attention. But none of that, not the restaurant. Not the photos. Not the overheard hallway comment, prepared me for the conversation that happened on a Sunday morning in late February. 4 months before the wedding, Daniel called me the week before and asked if he could bring Desiree over for brunch. Said they had some planning things to go over. I made eggs and toast and put on coffee and set the table for 3. Because Marcus was at his Saturday occupational therapy session and wouldn't be back until noon. They arrived at 10. Desiree had brought a binder. An actual binder, with tabs, which told me this was not going to be a casual conversation. We sat down. She opened the binder. She walked me through the wedding timeline with the efficiency of a woman who had thought about nothing else for 6 months. The ceremony at 4. The reception by 6:30. The photographer, a woman named Jade, who specialized in what Desiree called elevated editorial portraiture. She said the word editorial 4 times in 20 minutes. And then she got to it. She said the family portrait session was scheduled for the half hour before the ceremony. She said Jade had a very specific visual vision for the portrait's clean lines, neutral backgrounds, an uncluttered silhouette. She said that after a lot of thought, she and Daniel had decided it would be best if Marcus didn't attend the wedding. She said the wheelchair complicated the visual composition. She said it with the tone of someone announcing a minor logistical inconvenience, the same tone you'd use to say the caterer had changed the appetizer selection, or the florist needed an extra week. I looked at Daniel. My son, my good, gentle, conflict-averse son was staring at his coffee cup. He didn't look up. I looked back at Desiree. I said, Marcus is the only grandchild I have. She said, we know that. Rai. We're just thinking about the overall experience. I said, he's 8 years old. She said, of course. And we love Marcus. We're just trying to create a cohesive aesthetic for the day. There was that word again. I nodded. I picked up my coffee cup. I took a sip. I told them I understood, and that I appreciated them coming to talk to me directly. I told them I needed a few days to think about it. They left at 11:15. Marcus came home at noon. He dropped his backpack by the door, came into the kitchen, and said, "Grandpa Reg, what did you know that seared salmon is actually cooked at a very high temperature for a very short time? I've been thinking about this." I told him I had not known that, but I was glad he'd looked into it. He climbed onto the kitchen stool and started on his lunch, and I stood at the sink and looked out the window at the backyard and thought about what I was going to do. Because here is what Desiree did not know. She did not know that the venue she had selected for her wedding, a converted brick event space in the warehouse district, a place called the Fenwick Hall, with exposed wooden beams and original hardwood floors, and the kind of industrial chic atmosphere that photographers described in breathless terms on their websites. She did not know that building was mine. I purchased the Fenwick property 11 years ago as part of a portfolio acquisition. My company manages it. The operating lease for the event space business runs through my subsidiary. The current tenant, the couple who runs the Fenwick Hall wedding venue, pays rent to a management company that reports to me. Desiree had selected my building. She had put down a $4,200 deposit on a space I owned to host a wedding from which she intended to exclude my grandson. I did not plan this. I want to be very clear about that. I had no idea. When she first mentioned the Fenwick 2 months earlier, that she was talking about my property. I have 12 commercial buildings in this county. I don't track every event booking in every one of them. It was only when I looked up the venue online that evening, when I looked at the photographs on Jade, the photographer's portfolio, saw the exposed beams and the original brick, that I recognized it. I sat with my laptop at the kitchen table for a long time. Marcus was in the living room watching an old Western. I could hear the theme music drifting in. He'd gotten into Westerns because of a movie Carol and I had shown him 2 Christmases ago. And now he had a whole ranking system for which ones were historically accurate and which ones took liberties, which was a phrase he'd gotten from me. I thought about Patricia. I thought about the way she'd looked at Marcus when he was born, that particular expression that parents get. That mixture of terror and awe and absolute fierce love. I thought about what she would say if she could see this situation. I already knew what she'd say. She'd say, "Dad, handle it." I opened my email. I wrote a message to my property manager, a man named Garrett, who has worked for me for 19 years. I told him I needed to speak with him Monday morning about a tenant matter at the Fenwick property. I did not sleep much that night. Monday came. I called Garrett at 8. I explained the situation. Not the full emotional weight of it, just the facts. My son's fiancée had booked the venue. The event excluded my disabled grandson. I needed to understand what our options were. Garrett, who has 3 kids of his own and a mother he adores. There was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want to happen?" I said. "I want to know what the lease says." He pulled the tenant agreement. He read me the relevant section. Like most commercial event venue leases, it included a conduct clause, a provision that the tenant's business operations must comply with applicable law, including the Americans with Disabilities Act. Desiree had not violated the ADA herself. She was a private party, not a public accommodation. But the venue, as a place of public accommodation, had its own obligations. More to the point, the tenant's lease renewal was coming up in 90 days. Garrett had already been in preliminary conversations about the terms. Those conversations could develop in any number of directions. I told Garrett I wasn't going to threaten anyone. I wasn't going to do anything illegal. I wasn't going to interfere with an existing contract. What I wanted was simple. I wanted a conversation with the venue operator. a quiet one. And I wanted it to happen before any decisions were finalized. Garrett set the meeting for Thursday. The venue is operated by a woman named Sandra and her husband Tom. They've run the Fenwick Hall for 6 years. They're good tenants. They maintain the space well. They pay on time. And they've built a genuinely lovely business. I don't hold any of this against them. They had no idea about the backstory when they took the Desiree's booking. I drove to the Fenwick on Thursday morning. I parked in the lot I own. I walked into the building I own. Sandra met me at the door with a smile. She was clearly working hard to maintain. She knew I was the landlord. And landlord visits are never uncomplicated. I told her I wasn't there to cause trouble. I told her about Marcus. I told her about the situation plainly, my grandson. Age 8. Cerebral palsy. Wheelchair user. Had been excluded from a wedding booked at her venue, specifically because of his wheelchair. I told her I was his guardian. And that this exclusion had been explained to me in my own kitchen. Sandra's expression changed as I spoke. I watched the professional composure shift into something more genuine. She has a nephew. She told me. With spina bifida. He uses a walker. I told her I wasn't asking her to cancel the booking unilaterally. I told her I wasn't threatening her lease. What I was asking was whether she would be willing to reach out to the booking party and communicate, clearly and formally, that the Fenwick Hall does not accommodate requests that exclude guests on the basis of disability, that this was not only a legal matter, but a policy matter, their policy, which I would be glad to help formalize if she wanted that on record. Sandra looked at Tom. Tom looked at me. He said, "We never actually knew they were planning to exclude anyone. We didn't know any of this." I told him I believed him completely. Sandra said she would make the call. She made it that afternoon. I was not on that call. I only know what Daniel told me later, and what Desiree's behavior in the following days suggested. What I understand is that Sandra called Desiree, explained the venue's position on disability accommodation, and informed her that the Fenwick Hall could not support an event that had made formal arrangements to exclude a guest on the basis of a physical disability. She offered a full refund of the deposit. She did not mention me. She did not mention the lease. She was professional and direct and, by Daniel's account, absolutely immovable. Desiree called Daniel within the hour. Daniel called me that evening. He was not angry. That surprised me. A little. He was quiet. He said, "Dad, did you have something to do with what happened today?" I said. "I had a conversation. I didn't do anything that wasn't in my power to do." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She excluded Marcus." I said, "She did." He said, "I went along with it. I didn't say anything. I let that sit in the air between us." He said, "I should have said something. The first time she brought it up, I should have said no. I told him that I knew he wasn't a bad man. I told him that the people who love us are sometimes capable of making us smaller than we are, and that it wasn't a character verdict, it was a choice. And choices could be changed." He was quiet again. Then he said, "Is Marcus okay?" I told him Marcus was currently ranking Sergio Leone films by historical accuracy and had very strong opinions about the cinematography and the good, the bad, and the ugly. He laughed. A real laugh. The kind that means you've exhaled something you've been holding. If you enjoy stories like this, real family drama, real consequences, real moments of quiet justice, consider subscribing to the channel. We tell these stories because they matter, because the people who get overlooked deserve to be seen. The week after the Fenwick call was not simple. Desiree was furious. She made calls. She asked Daniel to confront me. He didn't, she implied, in a text message that Daniel later showed me, that I had interfered with her wedding and that it was inappropriate and that she expected an apology. I did not provide one. What I did instead was call Marcus. I drove to the school on a Wednesday afternoon to pick him up, which I do twice a week anyway. We stopped at the diner. We always go to a place with red vinyl booths and very good pie, and I bought him a slice of cherry and a glass of chocolate milk, which is his standing order. He said, "Grandpa Reg, are you and Uncle Daniel having a fight?" I said. "Not exactly." He said, "Is it about the wedding?" I looked at him. He was looking at his pie with the careful, focused expression he uses when he's processing something complicated. Marcus is not a child who misses things. He never has been. I said. "Did you know about the situation with the wedding?" he said. Without looking up, "I heard Aunt Desiree on the phone once. I didn't hear everything, but I heard her say my wheelchair would be a problem." I put down my fork. He said, "It's okay. Grandpa Reg, I'm used to it." I sat across from my 8-year-old grandson in a red vinyl booth in a diner that smelled like coffee and pie. And he said, "I'm used to it." And I had to take a long breath to keep my voice steady. I told him, "You should never have to get used to it. That's not something anyone should have to get used to." He looked up at me then. He has Patricia's eyes. He has Carol's way of tilting his head slightly when he's deciding whether to trust what you're telling him. He said, "Did you fix it?" I said. "Untold." He nodded. He went back to his pie. And I thought, for just a moment, that I could hear my late wife Carol saying something from somewhere I couldn't quite reach. Something about how the people who think they're just planning a party sometimes forget who built the room they're standing in. The fallout from the Fenwick situation took several forms. Desiree found another venue, a hotel ballroom in a neighboring town. She did not invite me to discuss the new arrangements. Daniel had a long conversation with her several. In fact, over the course of 2 weeks, the details of which he shared with me in pieces, what I understood was that Desiree did not, at first, connect my ownership of the Fenwick property with the call from Sandra. She assumed it was some kind of general complaint that had been filed, or an advocacy group that had gotten wind of the situation. It was Daniel who eventually told her the truth. By his account, that conversation was very difficult. I asked him what she said when she found out. He said she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He set me up." Daniel told her I hadn't set her up, that I'd simply used what I had available to make something right, that the real question wasn't what I had done, it was why she had needed to be stopped in the first place. By Daniel's account, that landed hard. There was a period of about 10 days, this is in May, 2 months before the original wedding date, where it was not clear whether there was still going to be a wedding. Daniel called me twice during that period. Not to ask for anything, just to talk. He asked me once if I was sorry for how things had gone. I said I'm sorry Marcus ever had to hear the word aesthetic in connection with his wheelchair. I'm not sorry for anything I did. He said he understood. He said he was starting to understand a lot of things he hadn't understood before. I told him that was probably worth paying attention to. The wedding did eventually happen. A smaller ceremony than originally planned, 30 guests instead of 80. Hotel ballroom. Not the Fenwick. Jade, the photographer, was released from her contract, which I gather was another difficult conversation. And Marcus was there. I want you to understand that I did not make Marcus's attendance a condition of anything. I did not negotiate. I did not issue an ultimatum. What happened was this: Daniel came to my house 2 weeks before the wedding, sat down at the same kitchen table where Desiree had sat with her binder, and said, "I want Marcus there." And I want him there because it's right. Not because anyone made me. I told him that was all I'd ever wanted. The wedding was on a Saturday in July. Marcus wore a gray suit that we found together at a department store. And he spent 15 minutes in front of the mirror deciding whether the tie was historically accurate to the period. Which I told him was not a meaningful concern for modern weddings, but that I appreciated his thoroughness. He was the ring bearer. I need to say that again. He was the ring bearer. Daniel asked him directly, privately, 2 weeks before the ceremony. And Marcus came home with an expression I hadn't seen on his face in a long time, that particular combination of being chosen and feeling safe. He practiced carrying the ring pillow with extreme seriousness for 4 days. He told me there was a correct speed for the ring bearer processional, and that he had timed it using a stopwatch app. The photographs from that day, I have one on my desk, as I'm telling you this story, show Marcus in his gray suit, pillow in his lap, moving down the aisle between rows of 30 people who were on their feet. Jade was not the photographer. The photographer Daniel hired instead was a young woman from the neighborhood who had gone to school with Patricia. She took the kind of photographs that are not particularly editorial. They are just true. One of them is Marcus, looking up at Daniel with an expression that is impossible to misread. Desiree is in the photograph too. She is looking at Marcus, and her expression is harder to read. It's not the polished, managed expression I was used to seeing from her. It's something more complicated. Something that might, if you were feeling generous, be the beginning of understanding. I have thought about that photograph a great deal. I don't know what Desiree will become as a person. I don't know whether the events of that spring changed her in any lasting way. People are complicated. The women and men who do thoughtless or cruel things are not always irredeemable. Sometimes they are just people who have never been stopped before, never been faced with consequences, never had to sit with what they've done. I hope, for my son's sake and for Marcus's sake, that what happened mattered to her. I genuinely hope that, but I'll tell you what I know for certain. I know that Marcus wore a gray suit on a Saturday in July and carried the rings down the aisle. I know that he practiced with a stopwatch. I know that he told me afterward, in the car on the way home, that the processional had taken slightly longer than he'd timed in rehearsal, but that he'd adjusted his pace smoothly and he didn't think anyone had noticed the discrepancy. I told him I hadn't noticed at all. He said, "Good. That's what a professional does." I'm a man who has negotiated leases with some of the most difficult people in the commercial real estate business. I have sat across tables from people who lied to my face and smiled about it. I have closed deals and walked away from deals and done everything in between. None of it is as satisfying as that car ride home. There is a thing I believe. After 70 years of living and 41 years of business and 4 years of raising a grandson who reads at a 6th grade level and ranks Westerns by historical accuracy, I believe that the people who mistake quietness for weakness have a reckoning coming. Not always. Not on a schedule. Not delivered by anyone with authority or power or obvious means. Sometimes the reckoning is just a landlord who happens to own the building you chose. Sometimes it's a phone call. Sometimes it's a Thursday morning meeting. And sometimes it's a little boy in a gray suit, moving down an aisle at exactly the right speed, carrying something precious and fragile and absolutely irreplaceable. If you've ever had to fight for a child who couldn't fight for themselves, if you've ever watched someone dismiss a person you love as an inconvenience, I hope this story meant something to you. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me about the person in your life who deserved better and got it, or who deserved better and is still waiting. We read every one. And if you like real stories with real stakes and real people who refuse to be quiet when it matters, a like really does help the channel reach people who need to hear this. My name is Reginald. My grandson is Marcus. And we're doing just fine.